Dear friends, my name is Loria Devacci and I am a sophomore at Providence High School. I welcome all of you this evening. Today we welcome Ms. Jenna Leventhal, who will be lecturing on the subject Armenian Film Foundation Collection at USC Shoah Foundation. There are close to 400 archives available in the USC Shoah Foundation. The films of the Armenian Film Foundation Collection will be preserved by perpetuity and indexed so that the rich material contained in them is discoverable. This archive is now available for scholars around the world for use in education around the world. This presentation will engage the theoretical and practical implications of effectively using the audio-visual testimonies of the USC Shoah Foundation Visual History Archive. With a focus on the teaching of genocide, both as a historically specific moment and a universal human experience, the presentation will explore the challenges and opportunities of using first-person narrative. Dr. Kori Street is the Director of Education at the USC Shoah Foundation, the Institute for Visual History and Education. As such, she defines and directs the national and international education agenda for the Institute, including the award-winning Eyewitness program. Prior to joining the Institute, Dr. Street was Associate Professor and Chair at Mount Royal University, where she was responsible for the development of a number of courses focused on the history and representation of the Holocaust. She completed a master's in the history of education at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at University of Toronto. Dr. Street received her PhD in history from the University of Victoria in 2001. She has many publications. Due to sickness of Dr. Kori over the weekend, Ms. Jenna Leventhal, Associate Director of Education, will lecture us this evening. I will invite her to start the lecture.
Thank you very much for having me. Dr. Street certainly sends her regrets. She was really looking forward to coming, and she had already invited me to come with her as her guest to hear her lecture, but unfortunately she's at home recovering. So we wish her well. Again, I'm Jenna Leventhal. I'm the Associate Director of Education, focusing on digital engagement. And we'll talk a little bit about what we do at USC Shoah Foundation and how the amazing collection of 400 interviews from the Armenian Film Foundation have been able to come to us, be preserved in perpetuity, as Lori said, and be able to be accessed now by scholars, educators all around the world. But what I wanted to start with was this quote: "I am an eyewitness, seeing a nation that died." In his interview with J. Michael Hagopian, Armenian genocide survivor Samuel Kadorian utters those specific words in his interview. His interview is one of the many, one of the 400 being ingested into the University of Southern California's Visual History Archive. And once all of these testimonies, all of these interviews are fully ingested, they will be available for use in education all around the world. As we were introduced, the presentation that we'll be talking about today will be exploring the practical implications, the theoretical underpinnings of using visual history testimony in education all around the world. What we have seen for the last several years in our research, that students have demonstrated significant cognitive and affective gains when using testimony in their education, when it's being used as an effective tool for teaching. And with a focus specifically on teaching of genocide, both as a historically specific moment and a universal human experience, as we just heard, we're going to explore some of these challenges, some of these opportunities of using first-person narrative for that specific topic. To give you a little bit of context, I'll tell you about what we do at USC Shoah Foundation. Up on the screen is our mission statement: to overcome prejudice, intolerance, and hatred, and the suffering they cause through the educational use of the testimonies. Many of you have perhaps heard of the Shoah Foundation as being founded over 20 years ago by Steven Spielberg, a filmmaker who, after completing the movie Schindler's List, started our organization in 1994 to preserve the stories of Holocaust survivors in particular. This was very close to our mission statement from the very beginning, and it hasn't really changed much. And one of the important pieces that we have been doing in the recent years is beginning to expand our collections from just Holocaust survivors to survivors and witnesses of other genocides throughout history. In about 2006, we moved from some trailers on the back lot of Universal Studios to the amazing, beautiful library at University of Southern California. And one of the things that moving to USC afforded us was the ability to preserve our collection of testimonies in perpetuity. The university has dedicated itself to that mission, that we know that these testimonies will always be preserved as technologies change. Each level of new technology comes and new versions need to be created to ensure that our collections in the Visual History Archive will be able to be accessible for years and decades and generations to come. What I want to start with, again, we had a little quote from Sam Kadorian, but I also wanted to hear his voice and have you all have an opportunity to hear from Sam. So we'll let him speak to us for just a moment.
I am an eyewitness seeing a nation that died. They took us to the desert, and there, from a family of 7, only my mother and I survived. And how we got to safety, that's another story.
So Sam Kadorian shares his story, his personal experience, in the film taken by J. Michael Hagopian. We're going to talk a little bit about the collection in particular and how it came to us at USC, but I wanted to just get a sense, have you all get a sense of when I'm talking about testimony, when I'm talking about these interviews, how we think about them and how we frame them from an educational perspective. What you see up on the screen is actually a screenshot of one of our educational products called Eyewitness, and it's a website and a tool specifically for middle and high school educators and their students. And one of the key pieces that we have teachers and their students start with before jumping into any type of content is really thinking about the concept. What is testimony? When somebody shares their life story, when somebody shares these moments of their past, what is it that we're talking about? And very specifically, we have a great 3-minute or so video that introduces it really for that middle high school audience, getting them to understand what is testimony. It's a first-hand authentication of a fact. It's evidence. This is a primary source material when students are learning all about primary sources, secondary sources, as they work throughout their middle and high school careers, which I'm sure you are very well experienced in and can tell us all about what your teachers are bringing into the classroom in terms of primary and secondary sources. We understand that that is very, being able to offer resources that are both collectively engaging as well as historically specific and important to the curriculum as a whole, so that teachers understand that this is something that can be used and can be integrated, and it's not taking away from any other part of their curriculum. One of the things we also want to think about and talk about with teachers and students when we look at memory. When someone is giving their testimony, when someone is sharing about their life story, we understand that these are personal remembrances, this is their experience, this is one person's truth. And it's often said that memory mediates between the present and the past, and that it lays the past to rest, but it can also keep it alive. It can bind communities together, it can keep them from forming or tearing them apart. We know that memories can be both institutionally formed, they can be collective memories, and then of course there's individual memories. And we see a little bit of all of that, specifically the individual memory, with what we have now in the Visual History Archive at USC Shoah Foundation. We have over 53,000 video testimonies across 39 different languages that were taken in over 60 different countries around the world. As I mentioned, our collection started very specifically with Holocaust survivors and witnesses, liberators, other individuals, Roman Sinti survivors, survivors of eugenics policies, rescuers, aid providers, war crimes trial participants. And as our collection has begun to expand, we now have over 13 experience groups that include survivors of the Rwandan Tutsi genocide, the Cambodian genocide, the Nanjing massacre, and now, of course, the Armenian genocide. The testimonies in our collection, they average just around 2 hours, when somebody sat down and shared their life story. And the collection as a whole has over 107 hours of testimony. If you sat down with our collections and watched every single video back to back to back, it would take you over 12 years. So when we think about the amount of memory, the amount of story, the amount of history in this collective archive that is now available, it's really astounding. And looking very specifically, in terms of the collection that came to us from the Armenian Film Foundation, we've heard it has nearly 400 interviews, primarily of Armenian genocide survivors and some witnesses, most of whom are now deceased. So their voices, their stories, their memory, their family's history is now being able to be preserved and shared through the vehicles that we're able to provide at USC Shoah Foundation. You guys may know some bits of the collection, but I'll give you some of those really interesting specifics. The interviews that were taken specifically by J. Michael Hagopian started in the 1970s and continued out through early 2000s. They were conducted in 10 different countries, primarily in English and Armenian, some very rare Armenian dialects, and other languages as well: Arabic, Greek, Spanish, French, Kurdish, Turkish, German, and I think one is in half Armenian, half Russian. They switch between both throughout the testimony. And the interviewees, they ranged. They were age 8 up to 29 at the time of the genocide. So that also helps give you a sense of the types of stories, because obviously an 8-year-old is going to have a very different perspective than a 29-year-old. So being able to see that range of experience from a number of individuals. They talk about geographic locations in their testimonies from cities and towns from all across eastern Turkey area. And one of the things we were able to do in the 30 days leading up to the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide that was recently commemorated, we put on our website what we call 30 days of testimony. So each day had a different clip of testimony, sometimes was introduced by scholars like Dr. Hovnisian here, and that's all available on our website as well. In April 2010, we signed a historic agreement with J. Michael Hagopian, his wife Antoinette, and the Armenian Film Foundation. The agreement that we signed really paved the way for the preservation and dissemination of the largest collection of filmed interviews of survivors and witnesses of the Armenian genocide, that first genocide of the 20th century. The interviews conducted by the late Hagopian, he recorded them on 16mm film, again between 1975 and I think 2005 was the latest, really specifically for a series of documentaries. He passed away in December of 2010, just months after signing this historic agreement. And throughout his amazing, distinguished career, he produced somewhere around 17 or 18 films about Armenians, about the Armenian genocide, about Armenian culture and experience. And in the partnership that we were able to come together with Armenian Film Foundation and Hagopian, we were able to get copies of the raw footage of these 400 interviews so that they could be integrated into the Visual History Archive, digitized, preserved, indexed, and made accessible. And one of the key things when I talk about they were indexed, what does that mean? When we think of the back of a book, you look at the index and you want to find something in a particular book. Perhaps it's a real heavy, dense history book and you're looking for something very specifically. You'll flip to the back, you'll look in alphabetical order, and hopefully it'll get you to the page or the pages that help you find that. In our digital collection, what you can see here is our Visual History Archive. And what you can do is search for an individual's name. Perhaps you're interested in Samuel Kadorian's experience, so you type in his name. But let's say you're very interested in a range of experiences like family, stories about family, or early culture. You can type in those keywords, and they're going to take you to that moment in multiple stories, in fact. You'll be able to hear from Samuel Kadorian. You'll be able to hear from Alice Taft. You'll be able to hear from a number of survivors and witnesses on their perspectives of a particular topic. You'll be able to search for key geographic locations. So there's really your imagination is really at the point where you can end with your research in our archive because of the indexing that was put in and added to every single testimony. And to give you a sense, so you would start by typing in a keyword term like family. And you can see here we have a number of collections. So you can specifically just search the Armenian Genocide Collection. You can search across multiple collections all at once. Let's say you want to do a cross-comparative analysis. You're able to search all of the testimonies in our archive, all 53,000, all in one fell swoop. And once you're able to get into a keyword term, you're going to get search results like in any type of searching you would be doing in an archive or a library. And you're going to be able to get some information right from the very first page, who the interview was, what their experience group is. You'll be able to see what language they gave their testimony, what collection it's from, whether it's from the Armenian Film Foundation collection or the original Shoah Foundation collection or the Aegis Trust Rwanda collection. And you'll be able to dive directly into those testimonies. So we do a search for family. We're going to be able to see results on extended family members, family homes, and be able to click on that testimony, click on that link, and it'll take you to that minute in their testimony where they're talking about family. So you're not going to have to sit and listen to the entire thing. You'll be able to get in and go really specific to that moment. And one of the great things for students, because you get in and you get to a particular moment, but you may need more context. So you simply scroll up and you listen a little before, you listen a little bit after. And as we'll continue to talk about what we've seen through our research and education, the power of story is universal. And what we have seen through the use of testimony as a primary source that students can engage with in the digital mediums, students live through their iPhones, through their iPads, through their computer screens. It's a medium that they're comfortable in. And one of the things we want to think about is how we bring this important collection, this important piece of history, to students in a way that will engage them, to scholars in a way that will help them further the research. One of the things that we very specifically look at USC Shoah Foundation is based on what we talk about as our theory of change. We want to provide these testimonies, we want to educate students, not just so they know, but that they'll be motivated to engage, to become thoughtful, critical thinking individuals that work in their own communities to really embody the spirit of our mission. And one of the things that we see, and this is a very complex diagram, I'm actually just going to bring it all up at once. This is basically how we think about the power of testimony to make a difference in this world. When we think about the fundamentals of genocide, it always starts with an idea. There can be an idea, but if there's no interest of individuals to engage with an idea, that one group, one ethnic or religious group is less than the other, if there's no interest in acting on it, then we don't escalate even further. But then there may be that intent, which would then lead to genocide. So one of the things we're looking at is how we can combat each of those specific moments before we get to the point where we know this is a genocide and we need to intervene. So when we think about our pedagogical interventions, think about insight. If we can get students critically thinking, maybe they're going to question ideas that are being put forth in their communities. If we can get them to share a commitment for making this world a better place, free of hatred, bigotry, prejudice, perhaps we can commit that interest. If we can get people participating, then perhaps through this transformative educational resource, like testimony, like these stories of the past, we can think about how this will then affect intent of other individuals. And the way we kind of think about how are we going to be able to see whether this is working, because it's certainly nice to have a fabulous theory of change with fancy graphics on a PowerPoint, but one of the things we believe very strongly at the Shoah Foundation is that we want to be able to prove what we're saying. When we go out to communities, when we go out to schools, we want to be able to say that teaching with testimony makes a difference, that this is a transformational educational tool. And so one of the things we look at is whether a teacher is inspired enough to simply pick up a piece of testimony and use it in their classroom. Because that's the very first kind of barrier. If no one's using this material, then no one's going to learn from it. If teachers can then take it to that next step and integrate it into their curriculum, it becomes a key piece of what they're doing with their students on a semester-by-semester basis. And then can we see how students and teachers are perhaps both contributing back to the larger community, working with testimony, but then their own communities? How can individuals be inspired by the stories of the past to make a difference in their own worlds, to make a difference in their own lives, with their own families? Then we're hoping to see this level of civic engagement that will be able to start thinking about combating these other pieces. And really, ultimately, what we're trying to do is thinking about change. Can we change attitudes? Can we change behaviors? Can we change the societal structures? These are big, big pieces, but if we can start with small little bits and pieces and have students start thinking critically and engaging in their world, then we're hoping that that will lead to more cumulative efforts. One of the key pieces when we think about testimony in the way that we see this as being such a transformational resource is the intersection that testimony as a primary source can play in the curriculum. So of course we know there are curricular requirements, Common Core state standards in public schools, other standards, the International Society for Technology and Education. All of these standards that teachers are being faced with, how are they going to address, how are we going to get students up to the level that they need to achieve at the next level? But of course, while testimony can address those, we also know that they can address transliteracies, digital literacy, information literacy. How are you going to look at content and understand where the source came from? Who is the author of the source? What does this mean? What is it telling us? And then, of course, testimony also can find this space in between both the historically specific moments that we understand that the Armenian genocide was a historically specific moment, the Holocaust was a historically specific moment that had very specific cultural and economic and regional implications that fed into it. But we also know that these stories, there's universal human experience here. One of the things when we talk about having so many different collections together, what does this mean in terms of a comparative analysis? Well, one of the things I always think about is of course, we can try to understand the underpinnings, the things that led to events, historical events happening. But we also want to think about that we can never compare suffering. Suffering is suffering. And that's where you start to see these moments of universal human experience. And all of this can be discussed, can be brought together from both a research perspective, but also from an education perspective into the classroom. And the way that we do that is looking very specifically at how we bring testimony through our educational platform called Eyewitness. And we have 5 very specific learning outcomes for all that we do. We want to increase both subject matter knowledge. We want to increase critical thinking, which I keep saying over and over again, and I can't downplay that enough. We want to increase others' respect for other worldviews. We want to increase empathy. We want to increase a motivation to act, to stand up when we see something going on in our communities that does not seem right, does not feel right. And through all of that, we're going to hope to see that students become more responsible participants in this society. And that responsible participation will then lead to a social change as an individual, as a group. And again, trying to prove, how do we do this? So we, through all of our education programs, have a very robust evaluation program. When Kori fell ill on Friday and they're trying to figure out, okay, will she be able to make it on Sunday? We don't know. The question was whether I should come as our Associate Director of Education for Digital Engagement, or whether our Associate Director from Education for Evaluation should come. Because we're both Associate Directors and we both can speak to these pieces as well. You guys got stuck with me. I had a short ride just from Pasadena. And she was home with a 5-month-old baby, so I let her take the Sunday off. But we have a key person dedicated to evaluation. And what does that mean? We evaluate all of our programs. We do pilots with classrooms all around the world. And we look at it through a particular lens of bringing in multiple pieces of information. So we have students before they engage with testimony and after through self-report survey measures, tell us answers to different questions, answers to different measures. We do focus groups with students and teachers on their experience with working with testimony. We observe them in the classroom to see how this tool, how this resource, how this content is engaging students, or perhaps how it's not engaging students, and what we can learn from that. We look at their work product, because a lot of what we do with Eyewitness is to think about what students can actually create, what they can construct themselves. And the way the site is structured is that teachers and their students are guided through working with testimony, and then they're ultimately asked to do something to share their learning, to show their learning. So I'll show you a little bit of that in a moment. And again, we do interviews. So we take all of this material to think about what are we learning against our learning outcomes. We can hear from students themselves. We can see that change between before and after. We can get a sense from them on a personal conversational level. What did it mean? What didn't it mean? We can see how it's kind of playing out in the classroom, the classroom dynamics of teacher and student and student. How are they talking with one another? And again, to see what they share on that work product at the end of the classroom period, at the end of the semester. And one of the key pieces that we've seen for students after they're engaging with testimony and eyewitness is that they feel 93% increase. They speak up against stereotyping when they see it happening. 85% believe that it's possible to make a difference. 79% believe that personal stories were important components of history. We also saw a 61% decrease in the number of students who believe that stereotypes are really true and that they're good ways to help us understand people, which is a really key piece that we wanted to see, get a sense from students when they're taking away pieces of information from these testimonies. And some of the written pieces that students kind of put in the free text field, participating in this program has definitely changed my perspective on meeting new people and also try to nullify prejudice in the world. I've also wanted to make a difference in the world when I grow up. Now that I've learned more about situations like these, I can have an idea of where to start that change. And I've also learned not to be prejudiced at all or even treat people different based on their race, because at the end, we're all the same. So hearing from different students, different ages, middle, high school, students here in the US, students in Rwanda, students in Italy, students in Australia, it's really fascinating to see this range of experience working with the testimony and the types of things that they're taking away from it. Again, all leading to that more deeply engaged critical thinker that will engage in this world. Just to give you a little glimpse of one example of a responsible participant in civil society. Put up on the screen, oh, this is covering her face a little bit, but show you case in point, Ruth Hernandez. She's in this photo, she was a 9th grader at an inner city school in Philadelphia. And she participated in a online activity we called the Eyewitness Video Challenge that also had a contest component where we had students watch testimony in our archive, find a story that they connected with, that inspired them to do something in this world. We launched this contest when we had the 20th anniversary of the organization, the 20th anniversary of Schindler's List coming out. So we started with a clip of individuals who were saved by Oskar Schindler. And they talked about Oskar Schindler as kind of this, he was just a guy, he was a womanizer. He would go and he would flirt with all of the ladies, and he would come back with these big furs, and they were talking about him. He's just a regular guy, but as many of you know, if you've seen the film, the choices that he made were small, they added up, and led to a significant change for so many individuals, and we have many of their stories in our archive. And so with that as a premise of what one individual can do through a series of small individual choices to make a difference in others' lives, we had students scour the archive for something that they particularly connected with. And in Ruth's case, she's the daughter of El Salvadorian immigrants. Her father was undocumented, and a number of family members were also undocumented. And so she connected with the story of somebody being torn away from their home, having 5 minutes to pick whatever belongings they wanted. And she had seen that in her own community. She wasn't making the comparison between one or the other, but she saw this She's like, gosh, I've seen this type of experience. I feel very connected to this story, and I think I'm going to get involved, and I'm going to speak out for immigration reform. So this quiet, shy 9th grader who had never spoken out much for anything in her own community started gathering her friends and getting involved in local protests and attending immigration reform rallies at Philadelphia City Hall. And since then, she has really gone on to find ways to she's still a very shy, quiet girl, but she's really found a way that she feels empowered, that she knows, even now as a 10th grader, she still can make a difference in this world, however small pieces she can contribute. I have a short clip of Ruth talking about, we actually had the opportunity to bring her with us to Poland last January for the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. We had a number of students that came with us on this trip. And so this is a clip, I think, of Ruth sharing a little bit about her experience working with testimony in particular.
I wanted to learn more about the Holocaust, but I guess now I have a more learning. But even before I knew very little about the Holocaust, I didn't have that want to learn more, and I didn't have so much of an interest. And it really is worth it, hearing the testimonies, listening to other people's personal stories and what they've been through, because it's life-changing.
So that notion of watching testimony, engaging with story of the past, she never had any real personal connection to the history of the Holocaust, or why would she want to learn about that particular historical event. But through the power of story, the power of connecting with one individual face-to-face, even though it's on a screen, she felt more empowered to learn, had more of an interest, more of a yearning for her education, which we all thought was really powerful and poignant. And we're seeing that across the world with students using testimony. The humming's getting to me, sorry guys. All right, I keep talking about Eyewitness, our award-winning platform. This is a screenshot of the homepage. One of the great things, I always forget to lead with it because it's just kind of a given, but this is a free educational tool that we offer to teachers and students all around the world. It provides access through the internet. Anybody can log on, sign up for their free educator account, and teachers can then moderate the experience for their students. So teachers come in, they get familiar with the content, they get familiar with the tools we provide access to. We have multimedia activities that are kind of right on the shelf that teacher can assign to their students to engage with testimony, to learn about the history of the Armenian genocide, to be introduced to survivors, to learn about issues specific to historical content, but also subject matter knowledge. So English language arts teachers can come in and find a multimedia activity to teach about poetry. And then using the testimonies, using the stories of the past, which so many have poetic language that you can draw from, finding a story that way. And so there's a number of ways that teachers can come in and use Eyewitness. As I mentioned, one of our big pieces, we want students to engage deeply with the content that we provide. We have structured the site and structured these multimedia activities so that students start with what we call our 4 C's. So the very first C is all about consider. We want students to consider the context about what they're going to be learning about. Then the second C is collect. We want them to watch testimony and collect something from it. So they're not just pressing play, watching, teacher leaves the room, and then that's it. This is a very engaging tool where students can collect clips of testimony from the archive, where they do a search using those keywords that I talked about a little bit earlier, and they can save a clip of testimony and then work with it later on. They can collect key terms from somebody's story to then build a word cloud. We can have students build video projects. So there's a lot of different things that students can do in the site. The third C, again, is construct. That's really where they're doing. And then the fourth C, which is a very important one, is communicate. We want students to be able to communicate about their engagement with testimony. We also want students to be able to communicate with one another, increasing their own digital literacy to be able to speak and work in a digital medium. We want students to be able to communicate with their teacher and express why they chose what they chose, how they developed what they worked on. And so students can work on that and actually see each other's projects, which is a really interesting piece, so that students can actually comment on one another's work and be able to work and build those digital citizenship skills that we know are very important in the social media age, where students can think about how they're going to interact with their fellow classmates online. To give you a sense of what we've learned and how we've learned it, and a lot of this evaluation piece, that if my colleague Amy had come, she probably could have flipped the slides and started with the evaluation piece. We have, again, evaluation across the world, specifically in over 940 different students, more in control groups, looking at both primary and secondary schools, specifically US, Rwanda, Australia, Italy. I think I've covered that already. And looking across a number of different cities, LA, Chicago, Kigali, and a number of other cities throughout Rwanda, Philadelphia, New York, San Marcos, just north of San Diego, Venice, Torino. I wish these were organized by the countries they're in, because I'm jumping between Italy and San Diego and Downey and Tennessee, but all over the place. And thinking about the different types of content that they're going to engage in, it was really about what the teacher wanted to learn, because in many ways, what we're seeing from our evaluation piece, whether they are working on an activity about the Armenian genocide, whether they are working on an activity about found poetry, to think about poetic language, we're seeing gains in those key elements that we're hoping to see: empathy, motivation to act. It didn't necessarily matter what that particular historical event that they were studying. They were getting historical knowledge. They were getting the subject matter knowledge that we wanted them to gain in the primary learning outcome. But we were also seeing those other key elements increasing. One of the key things that we saw out of our Rwanda pilot last year, Rwanda is a very interesting case work to do educational work in right now. The feeling of the community being very torn in some ways still and struggling with their past. And one of the students spoke up at a focus group that we did and shared that he felt that, I always felt like we're bending, but I don't want to do it anymore. I am changed. Which certainly is a fabulous little soundbite when we hear that. It's like, gosh, that's going to end up on all of our reports and every PowerPoint presentation we do from now until eternity. But to think about a student sitting in a classroom, having to learn about this very challenging history that was only 20 years out from the society that they're living in right now, and they're able to find, especially from teachers in Rwanda, being able to listen to stories of other genocide survivors, they found very helpful in the classroom to talk about their own genocide with their students in Rwanda. So much of their work in Rwanda in talking about using testimony started with learning about the Armenian genocide, about the Holocaust, before they could even start that conversation about what had happened in their own country. They needed that groundwork first. And that was one of these very interesting pieces that we were able to take away from hearing from teachers and students there. We had students put together a word cloud where they all watched the same testimony and they all chose key terms that resonated from an individual's story. And when you see the words very big, that's because multiple students were all choosing these same words. And then the smaller ones were there, you see the deviation between what students would have chosen. And one of the really interesting things that we hadn't quite realized is that students would kind of work in between English and Kinyarwanda. They would travel between both languages very fluidly. And that was one of these learning things that we took away and wanted to be able to open up the resource and the tools that we have on the site to accommodate for that. So whether you have students here, you have students in Kigali, you have students in Yerevan, whoever are coming to the testimony, they can listen to the stories, they can work with it in their own language and their own, work with it in a way that works for them, that's flexible enough for the teacher to fit into the curriculum. Another one of these great moments we heard out of the work we did in Rwanda, now I know the history of genocide in our country and outside of it. This will help me to protect myself, and I will tell others about genocide. Thinking about these stages that lead to genocide, having students understand the impact afterwards, having them understand these key elements was very important woven throughout the lessons that we had students engage with. And I think the Armenian genocide in particular, there's important value for taking this type of historical moment out of the abstract for students. Testimonies can do that. It's one person talking to another on the screen. It makes it real. It makes it much more hard to deny. They become witnesses to the history. One of the interesting things, we have a colleague in North Carolina who teaches at an Islamic academy. There are a lot of immigrants from a number of different countries that are coming to, in North Carolina that are coming to his school, and he has a number of students from Turkey. And he is a firm believer in using testimony and teaching especially Islamic students about the Holocaust and other genocides. And once we included the Armenian collection this past April, he brought that into the classroom. And getting a sense from the students, a girl he shared with me, a girl came into the class and she said, I can't watch this at home. My dad would have a fit. I want to watch this. Can I stay later after school so I can listen to these testimonies and I can complete my assignment because this is important to me. I need to understand this. And so he sat with her, he watched, and having the student be able to kind of speak to her teacher in a way that she probably wouldn't have been able to open up to if she hadn't been able to listen to the stories. It's a very powerful moment. The students themselves are becoming witnesses to this history by being able to engage in this content. You can see here we now have, of the 400, we have a very small subset that we're hoping to continually grow in our witness. So we have 12 testimonies from survivors and witnesses as well. And when we brought those in, one of our key elements was we want the testimonies, we want students to be able to search, watch, listen, but we also want them to be able to engage deeply through the structures and the tools that we have on the site. So we have an information quest activity that guides students and have them build a word cloud very similar to what you saw, something that we did in Rwanda that worked really well. And having students be able to engage and share what they're learning from this content is enormously powerful. We're hoping to expand the number of multimedia activities to have video building activities where students can search the archive and save bits of information. We're hoping to have photographs through partnership with other organizations, other archival materials, that students can add photos along with the testimonies and build their own video projects and share their experience through watching testimony. It's going to continue to grow. The collection will continue to be digitized and made available. We're working very hard over the next coming months to complete the digitization process, the indexing, and it's just a really momentous occasion for us at USC Shoah Foundation to be able to offer this content, to be able to offer the educational scaffolding, to be able to offer the tools that students can engage very deeply in the content. I think I'm going to leave it. I'm going to try to plug in the audio for one last clip. I want to hear from Elise Taff. I'm going to give the last word to Elise, and we'll leave it with that and we'll be open for questions. It's very quiet.
40 years, and it was snowing.
Let's try one more time.
We were in the outskirts of Damascus, and in Syria it hadn't snowed for 40 years, and it was snowing at night. And my brother was very sick too. I had to go out, and I saw my father's, the light of his cigarette in the dark, and he was meditating. He took me out, and then he showed me a group of stars, and he said, do you see that the brightest one in the middle? We called it the scales. And he said, you are the brightest star of them all. I couldn't imagine what you are saying, because I said, under those circumstances, how a father could wish such a thing about his little girl. Now, every time I see those stars, I think of that night.
Think about the power of testimony. I always think about Elise. Think of the other 53,000 individuals who shared their story and are being the witnesses for the future that we all now can be as well. I thank you so much for joining us today. Happy to answer any questions that individuals have. We're on Crescenta.